The first thing I noticed was the silence on her end of the line. Not the normal kind of silence, not the half-second delay you get when someone's moving from one room to another, or setting down a glass, or searching for the right words. This was a different silence. Compressed. Held. The kind that has a shape to it. I was lying in a hospital bed in Mercy General with a drainage tube in my side and a morphine drip making the ceiling pulse slightly at the edges, and I'd called her because I needed to hear her voice. That's all. 3 days post-surgery, groggy and sore and genuinely frightened in the quiet way that fear works on you when there's nothing to do but lie still and feel it, I just wanted to hear Mara say my name. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey," she said. And then that silence. Then a voice. Low. Male. Not the television. Not a podcast. A voice that stopped mid-word the moment she answered, the way a person stops when they realize someone else just entered the room. "Who's that?" I asked. "The TV," she said, without a beat. I said nothing. She filled the gap too quickly, told me about Sophie's school thing, asked how the pain levels were, mentioned she'd call the nurse's station in the morning. Her voice was steady and warm and completely ordinary, and I listened to all of it while staring at the water stain on the ceiling tile above my bed, and I thought, that was not the television. I didn't push it. Not because I believed her. Because I was on morphine and couldn't fully hold the thought, and because the part of me that loved her was still faster than the part of me that was already beginning to understand. That was the moment it started. Not when I found the receipt 4 weeks later, not when Ray told me what he'd seen at the Riverside bar, not when I pulled the phone records and saw the same number 87 times in 6 weeks. It started with a silence on a phone call. A silence with a shape. "My name is Daniel Marsh. 41 years old, structural engineer for a mid-size firm in Coventry, Ohio, the kind of city that used to make things and now mostly services the idea that it once did. I grew up here, left for college in Columbus, came back because Mara was here and I loved her more than I wanted to move somewhere else. That's the honest version. We met at a friend's backyard party 11 years ago. She was standing near the fence talking to nobody in particular, holding a beer she wasn't drinking, watching the sky go pink at the edges. I asked her what she was looking at. She said, "The light right before it goes." I thought that was the most interesting thing anyone had ever said to me at a party. We got married 2 years later in her parents' backyard in April. It rained. She laughed about it. That's the version of Mara I kept returning to for years, the one who laughed at the rain at her own wedding. Sophie came 4 years in. Bright kid. Watchful eyes. She has Mara's mouth and my tendency to go quiet when something bothers her, which I've always thought was an unfortunate combination. She was 9 the year everything collapsed, old enough to notice, young enough that she mostly processed it through questions she didn't quite know how to finish. The marriage had been good. I believed that then, and I still believe it now in the way you can believe two contradictory things about the same object, that a bridge was sound and that it fell. 11 years. A house on Elm Crest Drive with a porch that needed repainting. A daughter who still crawled into our bed during thunderstorms. Sunday mornings with coffee and the paper spread across the kitchen table. The ordinary architecture of a shared life. And then in February I collapsed at a job site. A ruptured appendix, as it turned out. Not the melodramatic heart-clutching kind of collapse, more like I set down my coffee thermos and sat on the ground and didn't get up. My colleague Marcus drove me to Mercy General and they took me into surgery within the hour. By the time Mara arrived I was already out of the OR and coming up slowly through the anesthesia, which felt like swimming toward a light source through cold water. She was there when I woke up. Holding my hand. Crying quietly, which she never does. I remember thinking how much I loved her in that moment, the particular tenderness of seeing someone's fear for you. She stayed for 2 days. Then Sophie had school and Mara had work. She was an account manager at a marketing firm downtown, and there was the practical machinery of daily life that doesn't pause for hospital rooms. She came every evening. Brought things I didn't need, magazines, good soap, the specific granola bars I liked. It was on the third night that I called instead of waiting for her visit. And heard that silence. Looking back, I want to be honest about who I was in that marriage. I was present but distracted. Good at the large gestures, anniversary trips, Christmas trees, being there for the big moments, and less good at the small daily attentiveness that is actually what a marriage is made of. Mara had told me this. Not in a fight, but in the quieter, more damaging way, sideways, in passing, in the tone of things she didn't quite finish saying. I had filed those moments under "she's just tired" or "rough week at work" or "this is what 11 years looks like." I had been, in other words, exactly the kind of person who hears a strange voice on a phone call and chooses to believe it was the television. Sophie called me the next morning while I was eating what passed for hospital oatmeal. "Daddy, are you coming home soon?" "Few more days, bug." "Mom cried last night," she said. After she thought I was asleep. I set down the plastic spoon. "She did?" "She was on the porch. She didn't know I could see her from my window. I asked her if she was okay. She said yes. Then she said, in that careful way she had of loading small words with large meaning, 'Is everything okay?' 'Everything's fine,' I told her. 'I'll be home Wednesday.' She said okay. There was a pause. Then, she came home late last night too. After I was already asleep. I didn't know what to do with that. So, I asked about her math homework and she let me change the subject, and afterward I lay there with the phone on my chest and looked at the ceiling and thought about how 9-year-olds notice everything. That was the first real crack. Not the voice on the phone, that could still be explained away by the morphine and my own fragile state. But Sophie had no reason to mention those things together if she hadn't already felt, in the wordless way children feel things, that they belong together. I didn't sleep well that night. And by morning, without quite deciding to, I had already begun paying attention differently. I came home on a Wednesday afternoon in late February, thin and sore and grateful for the cold air when Marcus helped me out to his car. Mara met us at the door. She hugged me carefully, mindful of the incision site, her chin against my shoulder, and for a moment in the doorway with the smell of the house around me, Sophie's sneakers by the mat, the particular warmth of the radiator, I felt the phone call recede. Home has that effect. It talks you out of your instincts. Sophie made a welcome home card with crayons and left it on my pillow. It had a drawing of our family, me with a bandage on my stomach, Mara in yellow, Sophie between us, a son in the corner. Simple and perfect and quietly devastating in the way children's drawings are, because they show you what a child believes. The first week back I was mostly horizontal. Mara brought soup, managed Sophie's schedule, kept the house running. She was attentive in a way that should have felt reassuring and somehow didn't, not because anything was wrong with it, but because it had a quality of performance I couldn't locate exactly. Like watching someone be exactly what they know they're supposed to be. Or maybe I was just looking for things by then. I've never fully untangled that. I noticed she checked her phone more than usual. Not compulsively, nothing so obvious. But there was a new habit: she'd pick it up, glance at it, and set it face down. The face down was new. Before the hospital I couldn't have told you which way she placed her phone. Now I noticed it every time. I told myself I was recovering and paranoid. This was probably true. The human mind, given weeks of horizontal stillness and a vague fear it hasn't fully processed, will start constructing narratives from inadequate materials. But there were other things. She'd started going to the gym in the evenings. This wasn't new, she'd always been consistent about exercise, but the timing had shifted. Before, she went in the mornings before work. Now it was after dinner, which meant Sophie's bedtime routine fell to me, which wasn't a problem except that it hadn't been discussed. It was just the new arrangement. One evening I mentioned it. Casually, I thought. Something like, the evening timing is new. She looked at me evenly and said the morning slots had filled up and the evening class was the only one that fit. Then she smiled in a particular way, not defensive, just closed, and asked if that was a problem. I said no. It wasn't the lie that stopped me. It was the smile. I'd seen that smile before, I realized. Over the years, occasionally. The smile that ended a conversation without ending it. I hadn't thought about that smile in years. I was thinking about it now. Ray came by that Saturday. He'd been my closest friend since college, architecture at Ohio State, same dorm floor, the kind of friendship that survives distance and marriage and the slow drift of adult life because it's built on something that doesn't require maintenance. He brought beer and a casserole his wife Carol had made, and we sat on the back porch in our coats while Mara took Sophie to her weekend dance class. We talked about my recovery, his firm's latest project, his daughter's college applications. Normal things. After a while there was a pause, and Ray did something he almost never did, he looked at his beer instead of at me. "What?" I said. "Nothing." "Ray." He turned the bottle slowly in his hands. "I saw Mara a couple weeks ago. While you were in the hospital." "Okay." "At Riverside Bar. Thursday night." He glanced at me. "She wasn't alone." I waited. "She was with a guy. I don't know him. Dark hair, maybe mid-30s. They were at a corner table. I almost went over, then I thought maybe it was a work thing. But." He stopped. "But." "It didn't look like a work thing, Dan." The porch was quiet. Somewhere down the street a dog was barking. I could hear the radiator clicking through the back wall. "Did she see you?" I asked. "No. I left." I nodded slowly. I thought about the voice on the phone. I thought about Sophie saying she came home late. I thought about the face-down phone and the new gym schedule and the smile that ended conversations. None of it was proof. All of it fit. "I almost didn't tell you," Ray said. "I know. Thanks for telling me." He looked at me for a moment. "You, okay?" I thought about it honestly. "Not really," I said. He nodded. He didn't try to fix it. That's what good friends do, they sit with you in the true answer. That night after Sophie was in bed I sat in the kitchen with my laptop and a glass of water and thought about what I was doing and whether I was going to keep doing it. Because there's a point, and I hit it that night, where you stop being someone who's noticed a few things and start being someone who's actively investigating their own marriage. Those are different postures. One happens to you. The other is a choice. I thought about Mara asleep upstairs. 11 years. Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator. The rain at our wedding and her laughing about it. Then I opened the laptop. I wasn't ready to look at her phone or her email. But I did what most people do first, I went back through the simple public record. Instagram. Work events. Mutual friends' timelines. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I was looking for the shape of a different story running parallel to the one I thought I was living. I didn't find anything that night. But I'd started. And starting is its own kind of crossing. By mid-March I was back at work part-time, mostly desk-based review and client calls, not cleared for site visits yet. The physical recovery was progressing but the internal one had stalled somewhere in early February and hadn't moved since. I'd begun cataloging. Not consciously at first, it was more like an involuntary accounting, the way you start tracking a smell before you've identified what it is. A late return from the gym that added up to 2.5 hours when the class was 90 minutes. A charge on the joint account at a restaurant I didn't recognize, $11, on a Tuesday lunchtime. A new perfume she'd started wearing, not dramatically different from before, just slightly, the way you'd adjust something if you were paying attention to how you smelled to someone new. That detail, the perfume, is one I've thought about a lot since. Not because it was definitive. It wasn't. Mara had always paid attention to how she presented herself. A new perfume could mean 100 things. But the retrospective weight of it is different. Looking back, I think I noticed it because some part of me already knew and was quietly building the file. I didn't confront her. This is the thing I return to most when I try to honestly assess that period. I didn't ask. Not directly. I orbited the question for weeks without landing on it. There were reasons, legitimate ones. I was recovering. I didn't want to introduce a crisis into a household that still needed to function. Sophie needed stability. And I was afraid, in the specific way I hadn't yet fully admitted to myself, that if I asked the question, I would get the answer, and the answer would be the end of something I still wasn't sure I wanted to lose. I hadn't put it all together yet. But something inside had already broken. The gym schedule remained evening. She was present at home, engaged with Sophie, functional with me, warm in an ambient way that didn't invite examination. And yet, there were moments when I'd say her name and it would take a half-second longer than usual for her to register it, as if she'd been somewhere else entirely. Moments when I'd catch her looking at her phone with an expression I couldn't name, not happy exactly, more like absorbed, the way you look at something that belongs to a version of your life the people around you don't know about. I thought about the man Ray had seen at Riverside. Dark hair, mid-30s. I found myself constructing him involuntarily, what he did, how he spoke to her, what he gave her that I wasn't. I recognized this as unhealthy and couldn't stop doing it. Sophie's teacher, Ms. Finch, sent home a note in late March. Not anything alarming, just flagging that Sophie had seemed distracted in class and quiet at recess, which wasn't like her. She suggested a check-in. I showed it to Mara at dinner. She read it, nodded, said she'd call the school. Her face did something, a brief contraction around the eyes that was there and gone before I could fully read it. Guilt, I thought. Or something that lived in the same neighborhood as guilt. I'll call her, I said. I'll handle it. You don't have to. I want to. She looked at me then, one of those real looks, the kind that don't have performance in them. Are you okay? She asked. The same question Sophie had asked me in the hospital. I'm fine, I said. Just tired. She nodded. But she kept looking at me for a moment longer, and I thought, not for the last time, that she knew that I knew, and that we were both choosing, for different reasons, not to say so yet. I called Ms. Finch on a Friday morning from my car outside the office. She was kind and measured, said Sophie had been drawing in her notebook during class, quiet at lunch, occasionally tearful without being able to say why. Sometimes kids pick up on things at home before the adults have worked through them, she said, carefully. I thanked her and sat in the parking lot for a while. Sophie was 9. She was watching her parents and she knew something was off and she was carrying it alone because neither of her parents had given her a place to put it. That was on me as much as anything. That evening I asked Sophie if she wanted to go get ice cream, just the two of us. She said yes with a speed that told me she'd been waiting for the offer. We went to Tucker's on Main Street and sat in a booth and I let her order the ridiculous sundae with 3 toppings and I asked her how she was feeling. Fine, she said. Then, after a moment, kind of weird. Weird how? She stirred her ice cream carefully. Like when you know something is going to happen but nobody tells you what it is yet. I looked at my daughter. That's a real feeling, I said. You're not wrong to feel it. She looked up at me quickly, surprised, I think, that I'd confirmed it. I realized I should have said that much sooner. Everything is going to be okay, I told her. Whatever happens, you're okay. She ate her sundae. I ate mine. We didn't say anything else about it and somehow that was exactly right. Walking back to the car she took my hand, which she hadn't done unprompted in about a year. I didn't make anything of it. I just held on. I pulled the phone records on a Sunday afternoon in early April while Mara took Sophie to her mother's for lunch. I'm not proud of it. I want to say that cleanly. Whatever justification I'd assembled in the weeks prior, and I had assembled it, carefully, the way you build a case to yourself when you're about to do something you know isn't clean, the act of sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and going through my wife's call history was not a good moment. It was a necessary one, I think. But not good. There was a number. Local area code, unassigned to a name in her contacts, which told me she'd been deliberate about that. Over the past 6 weeks, including the 2 weeks I was hospitalized, it appeared 87 times. Calls and texts, irregular hours, several running past midnight. 87 times. I sat with that number for a while. I thought about what it takes to reach 87 of anything in 6 weeks, the intention behind it, the sustained effort of it. This wasn't an impulse or a mistake. This was a parallel life, maintained with care. That was the first time I understood, it wasn't a lapse. It was a decision. Made repeatedly, over time, with full awareness of what was on the other side of it. I ran the number through a reverse lookup service. It came back to a Colin Reyes, 36, listed address in Glenwood Heights, the newer development on the east side, where the condos went up 5 years ago. I sat with his name for a moment. Colin Reyes. I said it quietly in the empty kitchen and it didn't make the situation more real, which surprised me. I'd expected the name to land like a stone. It landed more like a word in a foreign language, recognizable in shape but not yet attached to meaning. I didn't know him. I searched his name and found a LinkedIn profile, project manager at a commercial real estate firm downtown. I found a Facebook page, semi-private, with a profile photo of a man at a hiking trail, dark hair, easy smile, attractive in the uncomplicated way of someone who doesn't work too hard at it. About my height, I thought. I closed the laptop and washed my glass and put it away. There was a period of about 2 weeks after that when I had the knowledge and didn't act on it, and I've spent more time than I should have trying to understand what I was doing in those 2 weeks. It wasn't denial, I was past that. It wasn't strategy, I didn't have one. I think it was more like standing at the top of a staircase knowing you have to go down, and just taking a moment before the descent. I went through her gym bag one afternoon while she was in the shower. I'm not sure what I expected to find. There was nothing unusual, a sports bra, water bottle, gym shoes, a small makeup bag. The makeup bag was fuller than I remembered it being. I put it back exactly as I'd found it. A week after the phone records I drove past the gym on a Tuesday evening at 7:15, when she was supposed to be in her class. Her car was not in the lot. I sat across the street in a drugstore parking lot for 20 minutes. Her car didn't appear. I drove home. She got back at 8:45, hair slightly damp, flushed, smelling of the new perfume. She said the class had run long. She kissed Sophie goodnight and came downstairs and we watched television together until 10, sitting on the same couch, not quite touching. I thought about how much she'd been wrong about at that moment, about what I knew, about what I was feeling, about whether we were still the same people sitting in the same shared silence we'd always inhabited. The gap between what she believed and what was actually true in that room was staggering. And I was maintaining it too. We were both, for different reasons, keeping the fiction alive. Ray called me at work on a Thursday. I saw him again, he said. Where? Coffee place on 3rd. He was alone. I looked him up after I saw him at Riverside. His name's Colin, he works at a firm on Franklin, commercial real estate. He paused. Dan, I think I know how they met. Mara's company did a campaign for a development project last year. That firm was the client. I thought about the timeline. A campaign last year, probably spring or summer. 6 weeks of 87 calls. The hospitalization in February. The voice on the phone. Okay, I said. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. I did know. I just hadn't said it out loud. There was a Tuesday in mid-April that I want to describe carefully, because it's the moment the story shifted from something I was managing privately into something with its own gravity. Sophie had a school play, a short one, 20 minutes, an adaptation of something about spring and seeds and growing things. Mara and I both attended. We sat next to each other in the gymnasium on folding chairs, and Sophie came out in a green costume with a paper flower on her head, and she looked for us in the audience immediately, the way kids do, and when she found us, her face opened up in a way that broke something in me quietly. I watched my daughter perform her 2 lines with total concentration, the paper flower slightly crooked, and I thought about what we were doing to her, or what was being done to the world she lived in, the one that had us in it together. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was something colder and quieter, which is worse. Mara reached over during the applause and took my hand. Out of habit or genuine feeling or guilt, I don't know. I let her hold it. Sophie looked over at us from the stage and smiled the biggest smile. I think that was the point of no return. Not the phone call. Not the records. That moment, in the gymnasium, with Sophie looking at us and Mara's hand in mine and me knowing everything I knew, that was when I understood that things could not be put back the way they were. I chose a Saturday evening in late April, after Sophie was at a sleepover at her friend Cass's house. I chose that day specifically because Sophie was out, and because I'd had enough of carrying the knowledge alone, and because I had stopped believing that waiting would make this any easier for either of us. I made dinner. Simple things: pasta, salad, bread. Mara came downstairs in jeans and a loose sweater, hair down, looking relaxed in the way she sometimes did on Saturday evenings when the week was done and Sophie was out. Normal. Domestic. The version of her that had nothing to do with Colin Reyes. We ate at the kitchen table. We talked about work, about Sophie's play, about the front garden that needed attention. Normal talk. I was very calm. I had been calm for 2 weeks, which is not a natural state for me but had become available because I'd stopped fighting the knowledge and just let it settle. After dinner I cleared the plates. She poured herself wine. I sat back down. I know about Colin, I said. The silence that followed was different from the one on the phone. That one had been held, compressed. This one was just, sudden. Like a sound cutting off. She set down the wine glass. She didn't say anything for what felt like a long time. Her face went through 3 or 4 things that I couldn't entirely name. Dan. I pulled the phone records, I said. In April. 87 calls in 6 weeks. Ray saw you at Riverside in February while I was in the hospital. I drove past the gym in April on a Tuesday evening. Your car wasn't there. Each sentence landed. I watched them land. This was not the version of the confrontation where one person doesn't know what's coming. She'd known, on some level, that this conversation was approaching. I think she'd been dreading it and waiting for it simultaneously, in the way you wait for something that you know is necessary and terrible. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was low and very clear. Okay. That's not enough, I know. No. She looked at her hands. It's been going on since December. December. That was 2 months before the hospitalization. While we were still, as far as I had known, a functioning marriage with ordinary problems and a 9-year-old daughter and Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper. The hospital, she started. Don't. I said it quietly but it stopped her. Whatever you were going to say about the hospital, don't say it tonight. She nodded. I asked her what she wanted to do. She looked up at that, surprised, maybe, that I'd asked it that way. I think she'd expected anger, and I did feel anger, but it was under something colder and more considered. I don't know, she said. Are you in love with him? A long pause. I don't know that either. I looked at her. 11 years across a kitchen table. The rain at the wedding, the laughter. Sophie in a green costume with a paper flower. The voice on the phone in the hospital room. "Then I'll figure it out for you," I said. She started crying then, real crying, not performed. I sat there and watched it and felt many things that cancelled each other out and left something very still at the center. "The things I wasn't giving you," I said after a while. "Whatever they were. I'm not saying they weren't real. I'm not saying it's entirely your fault. But you could have told me. You could have said, this is what's missing. You could have tried." "I know," she said. Barely audible. "I would have tried. I know. But you didn't give me the chance." She didn't argue with that. There was nothing to argue with. We sat in the kitchen for another hour. We talked through the immediate practical things, where to start, how to tell Sophie, what the next steps were. The conversation was quiet and terrible and honest in the way that conversations are when there's nothing left to protect. By the end my pasta had gone cold and her wine was untouched and there was nothing left unsaid that needed to be said that night. I slept in the guest room. Before I closed the door, I stood in the hallway for a moment looking at the family photographs on the wall, a vacation in the Smoky Mountains, Sophie's 3rd birthday, a shot from the wedding where we're both mid-laugh, and I thought about the person in those pictures and whether that person was still me, or whether he was someone I was no longer going to be. I thought he was someone I was finished being. But I wasn't sure yet what came next. There was one more thing. 3 days after the confrontation, Mara told me something I hadn't asked about and hadn't expected. We were in the kitchen again, different hour, different tone, the particular flatness of people navigating logistics after the structure has come down. She said, "Colin ended it 2 weeks ago. That's why I've seemed," she stopped. "Off," I supplied. "I was going to tell you. I kept thinking, if I told you, it was really over. And I kept hoping." I looked at her for a long time. Hoping for what, exactly? She didn't answer that. This was not, in the end, a detail that changed anything. The affair had been real regardless of who ended it. The 87 calls existed. The hospital room existed. Sophie's quiet watchfulness at the kitchen table, drawing in her notebook, carrying the weight of something she couldn't name, all of that existed. But it told me something about the shape of what had happened. She had been trying to grieve something she hadn't told me about yet, in a house she was still sharing with me, hoping the grief would pass before she had to explain it. That is a particular kind of loneliness, not the dramatic kind, but the sustained kind, the kind that builds over years out of conversations not had and feelings not shared and distance mistaken for peace. I knew something about that kind of loneliness too. I'd been practicing it for years from the other side. We told Sophie in May, on a Sunday morning. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, and Mara and I had agreed beforehand on the language, nothing that blamed anyone, nothing that made Sophie feel like she had to choose sides. We told her that we had decided to live separately for a while, that we both loved her more than anything, that nothing about that would change. She listened with those watchful eyes. "Is it because of what I felt?" she asked. "The feeling like something was going to happen." "No, Bug," I told her. "That wasn't your fault." "I know," she said. "But did I feel the right thing?" Mara and I looked at each other across the table. "Yeah," I said. "You felt the right thing." She nodded slowly, processing. Then she got up and went to her room, and we heard her close the door gently, not a slam, just a close, and Mara and I sat at the table in silence and I thought, she's going to be okay. She has the right instincts. She felt the truth before either of us admitted it. I moved into an apartment on Garfield Street in June. 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor, a view of a parking lot and a strip of sky above the building across the way. I furnished it slowly, mostly from second-hand stores, which I found I liked, objects with no history attached to me, no weight of what they'd witnessed. The divorce was filed in August. Mara didn't contest anything material. We worked out the custody arrangement through a mediator. Sophie split her time, weekends with me, school weeks with Mara, summers flexible. It was not ideal. Nothing about the logistics of love surviving its own wreckage is ideal. But Sophie moved between us with a resilience that I think was partly hers and partly something Mara and I chose together, in the one place we kept choosing correctly, our daughter. Ray and Carol had me over for dinner regularly that fall. Carol never brought up Mara directly, which I appreciated. She made good food and kept the conversation moving and treated me like a person who was intact, which is what you need when you're not entirely sure you still are. I went back to the job site in October. The first time I stood on a structure I'd designed and felt the thing hold, I thought about what it meant to build something that bears weight, the calculations underneath, the attention to load and stress and the points of potential failure. I've always found that clarifying. The physics of what holds and what doesn't. Mara called me in November. Sophie was at her place, it was a Wednesday evening, and she called to talk about adjusting the Thanksgiving schedule. We worked it out efficiently. Before she hung up she said, quietly, "I hope you're okay." I thought about what to say. Then I said, "I'm getting there." "Me too," she said. There was a pause. Not hostile. Just, the space where things that can't be unsaid sit. "For what it's worth," she said, "you were right. I should have told you. I should have said something before it became what it became." "Yeah. I was afraid you'd give up on us." "I might not have," I said. "I know." That was the last real conversation we had that year about anything other than Sophie. It wasn't resolution, exactly. It was more like acknowledgement, two people looking at the same object from different ends and agreeing that it was there. The following spring I was at a job site in Eastfield, a commercial renovation, straightforward work, when I met a woman named Ellen who was the project's lead architect. She had a dry sense of humor and a habit of asking questions that went slightly deeper than the professional context required. We had coffee twice before I understood what was happening, and then a third time when I understood it clearly and decided, quietly, that I wasn't closed to it. It was slow. Not because I was guarded, or not only because of that, but because slow felt right after years of something that had moved too fast in the wrong directions. I didn't tell Sophie about Ellen for several months. When I finally did, Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is she nice?" "Yeah," I said. "She's really nice." "Okay," she said. And that, from Sophie, was a kind of approval. There's a photograph on my desk at the Garfield apartment. Sophie at 9, in the green costume, paper flower on her head, looking for us in the audience. She's mid-search in the photo, her eyes haven't found us yet, and she has that look of pure concentration and hope that children get, the belief that the people she needs will be where they're supposed to be. I keep it there because it's the truest picture of anything that year. Not the confrontation, not the phone records, not the voice on the phone in the hospital room. Sophie in her green costume, looking. The people she needs were there. Just not in the arrangement she'd expected. But still there. That's what I hold on to. There is a specific kind of collapse that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive in a single dramatic moment, a slammed door, a shouted confession, a scene that the people inside it will be able to point to later and say, "There." That was when it ended. Instead, it accumulates, quietly and without ceremony, out of things that were left unsaid for long enough that the silence around them hardened into structure. Daniel and Mara's marriage ended in February when he called her from a hospital bed, but it had been ending for considerably longer than that, in increments too small to trigger alarm, in the way a load-bearing wall can crack along its full length before anyone notices the ceiling has shifted. What the story ultimately reveals is not a betrayal of the conventional kind, a person who was fundamentally dishonest or malicious, who set out to deceive. What it reveals is something more common and, in some ways, more difficult: two people who had built a functional life together and slowly stopped communicating the things that mattered, until the distance between their inner worlds became large enough for a third person to walk into. Mara's affair with Colin was not the cause of the marriage's failure. It was the symptom, the form the failure took when it finally made itself visible. The accumulation effect in this story operates with particular precision. The gym schedule, the face-down phone, the new perfume, the smile that closed conversations, none of these, taken alone, constitute evidence of anything. Together, in retrospect, they describe a woman who had already made a decision and was living its consequences before her husband had any idea that a decision had been made. What is striking is how long both people sustained the fiction, Daniel out of fear of the answer, Mara out of something she herself couldn't fully name, and how the fiction required active maintenance from both sides. A shared delusion has two architects. Daniel's own accounting matters here. He describes himself accurately, present at the large moments, less attentive at the small ones. Good at building things, less skilled at the daily work of inhabiting them. He knew this. Mara had told him, in the indirect way people tell each other things when they've stopped believing in the direct version. He heard it and filed it and kept doing what he was doing. This is not exculpation of what she chose. It is a more complete picture of the system that produced it, because betrayal is never entirely the product of the person who commits it. It grows in the available space. The hospitalization is the story's moral center of gravity, the event that every other detail orbits. That Mara was with Colin while Daniel was in surgery, that she was, in the language of the story's most painful detail, already living a different life while he was fighting for the one they shared, is not something that can be explained by communication failures or emotional distance. It is the line that makes reconciliation structurally impossible. Daniel knows this. When Mara tells him that Colin ended it, and that she had been hoping the grief would pass before she had to explain it, we understand something precise about her psychology. She had wanted to return to the marriage by erasing the departure. She had wanted the option of not having left. This is a specific kind of self-deception, not the catastrophic kind, but the quiet, sustained kind that requires enormous energy to maintain and cannot survive contact with honesty. What distinguishes Daniel's response is its restraint. Not passivity, he acts, gathers information, confronts directly. But he does it without the performance of outrage, which is rare and worth noting. His conversation with Sophie at Tucker's, telling her that her feeling was right, that she wasn't wrong to feel it, is the moment he chooses reality over the fiction's comforts, and it costs him in exactly the way choosing reality always costs. The cold pasta, the untouched wine, the photographs in the hallway, these are the artifacts of a life that was real, even if it was also broken. What the story gets right, ultimately, is this: love and damage can coexist in the same object for years without either canceling the other out. The rain at the wedding was real. The voice on the phone was real. Sophie's paper flower was real. None of these facts requires the others to not be true. The work of the aftermath is not to decide which version of the story is the true one, it is to hold all of them at once and build forward from what remains. What stays with me most about this story isn't the betrayal itself, it's the silence before it. Not the silence on the phone call, though that's where it becomes audible. The longer silence. The years of not quite saying the thing, not quite asking the question, not quite pushing the door open when something behind it needed to be seen. We talk about betrayal like it happens to people. But so much of it grows in the space between people, in what's left uncommunicated, in the distance we mistake for peace. How many marriages have slowly come apart not because someone stopped loving, but because two people stopped telling each other the truth about what they needed? Daniel came through it. Not unscathed, but intact in the ways that matter. And Sophie, carrying her careful little flower, looking for her parents in the audience, she found what she needed too. That's the quiet part. The part that doesn't make it into the confrontation scene. People survive. And sometimes, on the other side of something this hard, there is something new that wouldn't have existed otherwise. That's not a happy ending. But it might be an honest one.